She was out of work for 10 days.
Yeah, good news. You got bronchitis.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah. My 97-year-old father-in-law, he
He goes, I was afraid
Only a
that
couple
she'd
weeks
bark.
ago.
I said, that's the charm of this. Come on.
Back in
The only reason I came down the stairs early.
So here we are,
Yeah.
so.
97 years old. Walking around, he has his little walker thing every now and then.
Oh, shit. I told, good morning. I told Tommy I was sending Colin's number and I forgot to do
I wasn't sure that was coming, so I literally walked all
I guess we're gonna set it up here.
that. That's good. This chicken. Yeah, get that out, take the.
Stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. So I'm gonna bring it up at the regular meeting, but probably next month, that's MS4 meeting.
Is that right? You'll be done?
I gave my notice to Bob, I keep him informed as the environmental director.
What are we gonna do without you, Walter? Mainstay, you're the,
In here, you know.
Bring here, the following game.
I doubt it.
It's
here. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm done with the MS4 track, that's it.
She'd be like, okay.
this feels pretty in town.
Yep. Now there's only 2-year-old supervisor.
Well, yeah. I wasn't a big fan of Thurston, to be honest with you. We used to, because we used to get together for the water resource thing down in Fishkill, and then all of a sudden, when Nicola was out, he was like, well, I started this. And then he would never wanted any professionals in the room, he just wanted,
I think I put everything in right, and then I turned it on.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, because it's not my.
Wrong.
I only stayed
you liked
on.
him? Yeah.
Really, I wasn't even gonna do 2023.
Uh,
But I only stayed on because of him.
it was me,
Back to the backup computer.
Oh, it's in the back, yeah.
She'll be gone in January.
That should be good, right?
No, I didn't.
Down in Fishkill with Ozzy.
Oh, boy.
That's
That's
down
a-
there.
that's
They set him up for, they set up for him to,
No.
you hear about any of that?
Or-
There was some really nasty signs out there.
Like a little block.
Apparently they had a discussion, they agreed they were inappropriate. Hello?
Yes, there's a
What's up?
little USB.
I'm in my MS4
in
meeting.
the remote.
I don't know.
Like
I don't know, we
that.
might, let me reach out to you.
People asking
I
me
might have
for
to
photos
rebuild it.
and then, you know.
So,
Like,
We've got
like,
like
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
like
yeah.
you-
so I forgot to let my water
Right.
guy give the engineer's number, so he's got the photos.
yeah, so, I guess Ozzy didn't take down the signs quick enough.
John, and he got in trouble.
And he got in trouble, because they put an air tag in it. You can't tell me that wasn't the setup.
We need to pull the screen back some.
That's pretty good. Did you zoom or is
That's
that
actually.
normal?
Oh, I'm not doing anything with that. I'm doing like the.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. It was,
You know, he's right.
oh, we might have to move this.
Nicole got the finance bill straight. What about his business?
That's what I was thinking, it's just a little screen back.
Oh, back? I was just gonna.
Oh,
Center.
Oh, yeah, like.
But then a little bit to me,
Huh?
a little bit to
What
me.
he does do.
Yep, that's.
We're not
okay.
gonna stop
Good.
Ozzy to have school.
Yeah.
You know, and then he wants to go to lawsuits.
us to do
Yeah,
the
let me get a
pointers.
I have a pointer.
Oh, you do, okay.
You have a clicker thing?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, so this will be your
Okay.
slides.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to move arrows through the screen.
And I was thinking when the training's over and they turn that off, we can sit around the table here for our
Yeah,
meeting.
that's fine. Cool, thanks.
You know, he built that big statue there.
She's trying to zoom the
Presentation.
camera in.
Okay, you wanna,
Oh. Oh.
$200,000, meanwhile, you know, all kinds of water problems in the town.
I was gonna say, yeah.
You know, you could have put that towards infrastructure.
Town buildings are falling down.
Yeah.
Starting to huge.
Need a new roof on the rec building. But what he does is, he hangs right out there, it's down along.
Hey, Pete.
He's nothing to do with doing.
Hey, I just got a call from wastewater, their truck is dead at Brett's Hardware, can you either shoot down or send
And
me
he's
down to see
under
if you
the,
can jump
oh,
on?
we're gonna stop all this over.
Alright, cool, thanks.
About 40 years too late.
Exactly.
Overdevelopment, it's already full. The only thing
It all started when IBM
Sound
came there in
better?
the sixties.
Yes.
The only thing
well,
that's
we're quicker on the left.
infill projects, right? You know,
Is
that
it?
just,
See where it's
that's
coming
all
from.
that's really left.
I, that
I
would
moved
be
there
the
as a
screen.
kid, Route 9 was one lane down by Walmart, you know.
Sound better?
There's no way to get the full screen,
I
right?
was in there 62 years, you know.
Unless
Just
you-
push the projector up closer to the screen.
No,
Oh, no, back.
that's what I was saying,
Oh,
pull,
back.
pull the screen back. there.
Well, we can move the table.
Yeah.
Now it's like a parking lot.
Well, if 84 gets an accident,
Oh,
forget it,
yeah.
it's total gridlock.
Oh, yeah, the village is shut down.
Everybody's got their ways and they're like, oh,
Yep.
if I go this way, I'm
Oh,
going around.
yeah.
Go down
You with
52.
300 other cars, you know, all on Main Street at the same time.
Big old parking lot.
I think it's like 10 seconds behind, so I have to wait to see. Is that better?
Don't forget your
Presentation in and then we can just.
We'll see how it
Yeah.
works, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. 40 years too late.
Yeah, they don't get on this soapbox, we're gonna stop all this stuff. We're gonna stop. They're just gonna spend a lot of money.
Yeah, you go there, that-
If you wanted to make it better, then work with them to make it good. Don't just put in some cookie cutter, you know, canned garbage.
Oh, I have a pen.
If you want it a certain way,
Oh,
then
I-
go after it and get it a
in
certain
that
way.
back
You're
room,
not gonna stop it.
in
Like I
like
said,
the.
Yeah, well, you set up the zoning way back when, I can go buy the
Like
property,
the
thinking I can do this with it, and then now you don't want to
Yeah,
do that.
unless you're gonna go through the zoning and change it up
Yeah.
and actually, you know, try and fix it, so to speak.
So here, we'll just,
It's,
yeah,
That's it.
I can put one of
The village,
these,
the
I'll
big
save this
thing.
with Kate, so she's actually at the meeting. And there's a
Fish
form
goes
there
medical.
for signing in today.
oh, yeah, Jackson, yeah.
How do I bring it up? Put it in.
Yeah,
So,
so,
well, back in the day, that was,
the medical group,
that was a medical, yeah.
and then
And then
they,
it was-
they moved down to build a new building down in Westlake, down by Walmart.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I grew up in that building, in that little green building in the corner.
Is that right?
Make sure
Yeah.
everything's focused, okay.
I had, you know.
That's weird.
Where my doctor already drove down to Fishkill. From the time I was born until the time I was
Same here,
20,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
A green building on the corner with all the funky ramps, went everywhere outside.
But people are like, oh, the traffic in the village is gonna be crazy if you let them develop that piece of property. It's like, well, when it was the medical group, they used to have
Why is it?
hundreds of cars coming in and out every day.
I think it's the lights,
The light.
yeah.
Well, it'd be great if it could be.
When it first closed, and then
Let's
the
just
West,
try
the
something.
first thing was, oh, it's a historic building, we can't do anything with it, blah, blah, blah. But falling down,
Mhm.
they carved it up
There you go.
with
Yeah,
thousands.
that's better,
of-
right?
Well, that's right.
blue.
You know, so there was zero history about it other than some of the facade on the outside, right?
Technically, structurally, it wasn't a that thing, but, you know, carved
So
out for
many-
air conditioning.
So many additions and so many
Duct work.
annexes and whatever, yeah.
Right? Yeah, I'll break it.
But,
I'm,
but yeah, I
I
remember
probably
that
will
going on,
too.
the first thing was as soon as they shut down, it was, as soon as.
Yeah,
the building
pretty
needed
Is that
renovating.
good?
So let's see.
Well, originally, they
It's
were
up,
gonna
up
do
Do
to
that.
next
zeros,
step.
yeah, and then if you needed to, you have a pointer?
Same thing, but it
Okay.
was falling down and they
Yep, so
actually.
you should be able to flip back and forth to your slides.
Mhm.
And
Because the village really didn't want it torn down, but
Oh,
Well, yeah, I mean, it was
it still looked good from the outside, but.
It was a cool old building, right, you know, it was pretty and whatnot, but.
Well, it had the clock addition on the back, and that was fun to take that.
That was awesome, yeah. I mean, the main body of it was really cool.
I can't really make any judgments on if it's blurry or not, because I can't see.
No,
So,
is there a
that's
focus?
better. I couldn't tell if it was blurry or not. Looks blurry to me, but it's just like in my eyes.
It looks just a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Well, that's what bothered me, like the people that were in there were over dedicated
So she's zooming the camera in so that everybody should be able to see the presentation well.
Yeah, yeah. Figure it out.
That looks a little better,
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
sharper,
A little sharper now.
bit fuzzy on the
Yeah,
edges.
yeah,
That looks better.
yeah, that looks good. You saying something?
Is that what Brian's here?
Oh, wait a minute, I thought you were.
Brian heard that.
What'd she say?
I'm just toasting, I'm not saying anything.
Is that still a little fuzzy?
Oh, yeah.
Did you figure out where the focus is?
No. Aaron,
Aaron, where's the focus?
still seems to maybe.
Well, for us,
Everybody loves the erosion model.
yeah, it was a fun table, right? Having a string table there. really-
Okay, you found it. There's like a fine, oh, right there, right there.
Right there.
That's sharp.
It's like very little.
That's sharp. Yeah, there's like a very small.
Yeah.
We bought that, you know,
So you know, I know you got here before we put it out, so.
and then couldn't do anything with it. Now we can put it out.
I was hoping they'd give us, two polls. Did my signal?
Then it would be like,
Yeah.
Then we would know
differentiate.
which one was ours.
Walter, how are you?
Too bad, hanging in there.
Good, thanks.
It wasn't out by last week, it ain't gonna be out till January. You know how that goes, that cycle of things, you know, if they wanna feel real good, it comes out in the end of October. If they don't care, you'll see it when it's January.
Oh, the mail.
I know.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
That would be good. You moved it over?
Yeah.
It's just gonna take a minute.
It's too full. I want mine here.
As long as people can see it, I think they can see it.
Okay, I can do this.
Oh.
Put mine right here.
Good morning, how are you?
God, I used to do this already.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this is interesting.
Nice crisp morning.
This is really good timing.
Doing my
Because
hair.
I'm gonna use those, I need 2 more credits.
I'm all set, but I'm wondering if there's
It doesn't- it's not all the
this should
time.
carry over.
But it's like when I'm
One of
doing
mine
something like
expires in
that,
October.
and then I put my hands
You can both.
my hair's been wet, and I can't feel
But I'm wondering if it'll carry over the one I,
Your excess doesn't carry over.
Yeah.
I asked.
but it will carry over.
both my hands are that wet, isn't it? I couldn't
Well,
feel
not
it.
at all. It's typically.
I quit. Flailing around.
It's 5:30 and I quit.
Because
My
I
dogs
asked,
had a wrestling match.
I asked them, because
Upstairs.
floodplain,
Did all that stuff.
that camp was open. I would go over 2 or 3, they carried it in the
I
queue.
could hear that.
I said, hey, by the way,
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just.
No, but it's zoomed out.
Morning.
We attended, she might work.
Yeah, that's all right. In my case, I wait till next month though.
Well, I have plenty of time next month.
We can talk about it.
Ready, she's just tweaking it so it's centered better and stuff, but if we need to get going, we can get going. Although we don't have everybody here. She's said there's gonna be 16, but that's including all of us.
Yes, yeah, that was included. 17, Joanne. Good morning.
Yeah, a couple of things.
Sure.
Can you send me a copy of the attendance sheet with me?
Yeah.
I can use it for my certified flight.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, do you need a certificate or anything?
No, we'll use that as the flag. That should be enough. Let them come back and say. I talked to Highway this morning about training. They're still asking questions like, they've done this before.
Yeah.
You know, oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. Their question was more about the number of people. As I said, how many people can you fit?
Yeah.
They're looking to do it back in the garage.
Okay.
Instead of doing it in town hall. That's the way Kenny the highway. That's fine. They have a bunch of chairs, they have a screen, projectors, whatever. I said, you can do that. How many people can you fit?
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to ask Kenny and find out. Tom told me the assistant. I said, then let me know, because I'd like to give you the answer.
Yeah.
Because I know you want to invite people. to
Yeah,
this.
yeah, if we could, that'd be great.
I should have been a dentist. Pull teeth and tongue.
Yeah. Must be up in the front row.
Hi, Walter.
Barbara, Judith, no, I kept her.
Leave it alone. All right, so then I'm just.
When you are ready
Because everything was still online. I couldn't use it. I guess you.
So I saw you on last
Okay, thank you. All right, it's all operational.
Unless they want a picture.
Yeah.
And I think there is actually so when we talked how many offers you have.
This is beautiful. I actually edited some out because I don't want to show people.
Yeah. Oh,
I appreciate it. I didn't hear from you. I should have gotten my nails done someday.
But anything I'll recognize?
Yeah.
Sometimes you almost feel pity because if that's the person's house and found the problem.
Yeah.
And then there's another
That's not out of the question.
site I had a bunch of photos of.
Oh, that's about
Looking to the other litigation site.
At least that could make
In case they'll narrow this
but I think I'm gonna come down that way, like,
where
next
he
week, so
bought land.
she messaged me last night, and said,
Town,
could you do Thursday? We know it's 1 and 3. And I guess she messaged me at like 7, and then at like 3, she's like, never mind, my schedule changed, thanks everybody. I'm like, should you not want to
I
go?
said, so now we're gonna go over this
She
case.
really wanted,
And when you have to walk and tell them,
and she really doesn't want to get them out of the basement.
You're really?
Yeah, only, at 7:20, I was supposed to go to bed, and then I felt like I waited like hours, I mean, you know, like days, it was a few hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't message at all, but I just don't care so much. Good.
Okay, my name is Walter Artis, and I want to welcome everyone to this Stormwater Management Officer Training Session. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Taylor for hosting this presentation. I'd like to thank everyone in attendance, and also anyone that's live streaming this as well. So with that being said, we're going to get started. First of all, how did we get here? Actually, back in 1999, the EPA issued the Phase 2 Stormwater Regulations or Rule. It became effective in 2003. In New York State, the New York State DEC was designated the regulatory authority in New York State. There was about 40 or 42 states where the local environmental agency was the designated authority I think it's now, it's high up to, I think, about 47 or 48 states. Regardless, in New York State, DEC is the authority. In 2003, DEC issued 2 permits. One was the MS4 permit. There was a 5-year implementation period from 2003 to 2008 to be in full compliance with the program. During that 5-year implementation period, the MS4 was required to adopt 2 ordinances. They were also required in 2008 to appoint a stormwater management officer for compliance with their stormwater management program. The stormwater management officer has to be an employee of the town or an elected official. It cannot be a consultant. The SMO is designated as the enforcement authority of both ordinances adopted by the MS4. We'll start getting into the ordinances. You've got 2 ordinances. The first one was the Stormwater Management and Erosion Sediment Control Ordinance. The second one was illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance. Some MS4s have given that a different name, but that's basically the title of both ordinances. As an SMO, you need to know and understand your ordinances. You need to know and understand your duties and responsibilities, which are typically not well spelled out. I recall back in 2008, one supervisor I was working with asked me for a job description of an SMO because he went to the county and they had absolutely nothing. It's my understanding they still have nothing. So I just wrote up what I felt would be the duties and responsibilities, and he took it from there, and he appointed his code enforcement officer as the stormwater management officer, which is likely the case in many municipalities. However, the stormwater management officer, the SMO, he or she is your local enforcement authority for both ordinances. Okay, we have your stormwater management erosion sediment control ordinance, the guideline for responsibilities and enforcement of construction site activities. We're going to start with the construction permit first. You have your local stormwater management and erosion control ordinance. You have your New York State general construction permit. That's the latest version, GP 020001. And then you have your most recent version of your MS4 permit, which is the GP 015003. So really, under those 2 permits and those ordinances is what you really need to be concerned with and need to know. Your typical duties are compliance inspections, documentation, and documentation is only going to get more intense as time moves on with new permits, administration, and enforcement. As far as SWIP compliance inspections conducted by the town or the MSO or the CEO, they are required as per your MS4 permit. However, the frequency is at the discretion of the MS4. It might be based on the scope of the project, whether you have sensitive areas, wetlands, steep slopes, whether it's a large site, multiple phases. In some cases, it may be due to the contractor on site. It requires more frequent inspections. So they may be regularly scheduled, such as weekly or bi-weekly. They could be random after significant rainfall events, or a lot of times it's also the result of a complaint. Documentation, again, is a big part of this, the MS4 permit while you're doing compliance inspections. That is only going to get, as I stated, more intense as this permit, if we see a new permit sometime probably in 2024. You're required to document all your compliance inspections. When you come to submit your annual report in June 1st of every calendar year, documentation is required in that as well. And if you are audited by the EPA or the DEC, you'll also have to show that you've documented your compliance inspections or construction inspections. You are also, the SMO is also the duly authorized representative. If you're not documented in the Stormwater Management Program annual report as the duly authorized representative, you have to go through what's called an MS4 signatory authorization. The DEC central office has to have that on file because you're the one that's typically going to endorse an MS4 SWIP acceptance form, unless in some towns might have an in-house town engineer that might also do this. But in most cases, it is the SMO. You'll be endorsing the notice of intent, in many cases, the notice of termination. In any endorsement you do, it should be recommended either by your town engineer or your village city engineer or some other consultant. This is just a typical, before, any project, whether it's a 2-lot subdivision, 200-lot subdivision, commercial site, you should have a pre-construction meeting if it involves a speedies permit coverage. I'll just briefly read some of the things that should be in place. You should develop an attendance sheet as far as who's going to be copied on all inspection reports, establish a distribution list, identify the operator's qualified inspector, which I'll talk about as we go on, identify the operator's trained contractor, which I'll discuss as well, identify the operator's contractors, so it might have multiple contractors, they have to sign a contractor certification form, identify the location of the SWIP box, you have to have a box on site that includes all the on-site documentation, and then you just review all the documentation that has to be in that list there, as everything has to be in that SWIP box on site. Then you'll just review the construction sequencing schedule. If any changes are gonna be made, this is the time to make them. I just was at a pre-construction meeting a month ago. The contractor made significant changes to the phasing plan, and this project is now basically stuck in the mud, so to speak. It's not moving anyplace until such time they submit an amended SWIP back to the town. It has to be approved, and then they can get started again. Pre-construction meeting, again, it's very important, like I said, whether it's 2-lot subdivision, 200-lot subdivision, any commercial site, it's imperative you try to get all the parties together, get them all on the same page, know who your players are, know who your trained contractor is. Again, I'll talk about the trained contractor. And just for those who haven't seen any of my presentations before, you are going to see my dog in a lot of the photos. She's accompanied me on every site inspection since she's been about 12 weeks old. She's still going out with me now. She's 10 and a half years old now. Actually, this is the one I was talking about. They changed the phasing plan. And so this project is, right now, I don't know where it's going. We're just waiting to hear back from the applicant engineer. We'll see where it goes. But this is a large project. It's a commercial site. There's lots of players. There was probably 20, 25 people at this pre-construction meeting. It's in the New York City East of Hudson watershed, so you had New York City DEP inspectors there. You had about a dozen guys from the contracting firm. You had their engineers, the town engineer, myself, and other people as well. So it was a large, you can see they even brought out a table. That was the first time anybody actually brought a folding table to a pre-construction meeting. So again, pre-construction meeting is very important. The SMO, your directives, that's the way it goes, Prior to commencing the construction activities, many times there's flag clearing limits. Those need to be checked either by the SMO or your consultant, whoever. Somebody needs to verify those flag clearing limits. It could be limited disturbance, it could be flagged due to wetlands or other site constraints, but that's typically in many cases. In this case, it's a large subdivision. This was another phase. I think this was a 13-acre phase. So we went out and checked all the flags with the map, with the operator and contractors to make sure everything was in line with the plan set. Your compliance inspections. Basically, when you're doing a compliance inspection, you're checking if all the required documentation is retained on site as per the speedies permit. Are all the erosion sediment control measures properly installed? Are they being inspected and maintained properly? Have stabilization measures been initiated in inactive areas of the site? And what I like to do, and I don't see it done very often, is follow the weather forecast. In many cases, on a lot of the sites that I inspect, you know, if I see a significant rainfall event coming up in 2 or 3 days, I'll just put out a, you know, a blanket email to everyone, button up your site, we've got a rainfall event coming. I don't see that happening much. It should happen more often. I think that's maybe something that SMO should also take into account. If you know you've got a significant rainfall event coming, just send out an email to all your construction sites. Have them button it up. Okay. What you're also looking at are all construction waste materials being properly managed. You're also checking, is there any evidence of a discharge onto adjoining properties? Is there any evidence of a discharge into the receiving waters or the MS4? Could a catch basin of an MS4? Are there any water quality or permit violations observed? And is the site in conformance with the approved site plan or subdivision plan, as well as the approved SWIP? So you're not only looking at the SWIP, you're also looking at the subdivision plan as well. You might see something like, you know, this shouldn't be here, and you know, you might want to bring that to someone else's attention in the town. I think it's wise to meet with the operator's inspector or general contractor during certain phases of construction. In this case, it was a phase of a larger subdivision. They were going to start putting into infrastructure. So we met out there with the operator's inspector, the contractor, and one of his workers. Communicate with the operator's contractors during construction. You're out there on the site, communicate with them. In this case, I was given the guy that Rain is sitting next to the good news, but I was waiting for the guy to come down the hill to give him the bad news. Like, you need to stabilize quick. This is the typical SWIP compliant inspection form that I used. I developed it back in 2008. I kind of took it from DEC and just simplified it and modified it to the, you know, to the town level, to the local level for the MS4. It's basically just a few pages. I went through some of the things you're looking for. I usually have a 4th page where I'm issuing other I have other comments or directives. I might highlight something or to put something in bold that is either been hanging around for a long time that needs to be addressed, or just something significant that they need to jump on. Also, if anybody has any questions, I don't mind if you interrupt now or you want to wait till the end. It's fine with me. I meant to say that at the beginning. Okay, the owner-operator. You need to know what his responsibilities are. He is the person, he's the legal entity in which owns or leases the property on which the construction activity is occurring. That's obvious. He is the person that maintains overall operational control over construction plans and specifications, including the ability to change the plans. He maintains day-to-day operational control over all activities that will ensure compliance with the SWIP. So he's also, technically, has operational control over his contractors and subcontractors. He should. That's not always the case. It's unusual for it to be the case, but it's supposed to be the case. But at the end of the day, the owner-operator is the ultimate responsible party if there's any issues on site. His responsibilities include the responsibility for implementation of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, certification of the notice of intent that goes into the DEC to obtain permit coverage. He's responsible for obtaining all the subcontractor certification statements. He retains the NOI, the notice of intent, the New York State DEC acknowledgement of coverage, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, and the SWIP inspection logbook at the site. And that would be in the mailbox. It could be in a construction trailer, but it needs to be retained on site. The documentation is very important that it's maintained. I know operators that have gotten violations from the DEC just due to lack of adequate documentation. Really no site issues, but lack of documentation. He's to maintain the record of all inspection reports. That includes his and the town's. If there needs to be a change in the site, he's responsible for amending the SWIP as necessary or warranted. And at the end of the day, he's also responsible for signing off on the NOT on his end. The town all has to sign as well, but he's responsible for that. The owner-operator, on any site that requires speedies permit coverage from DEC, the owner-operator is required to retain a qualified inspector to do weekly site inspections. So his inspections have to be conducted by a qualified inspector. I'll get into the definition of that a little bit later. I talked about the pre-construction meeting. You know, at that pre-construction meeting, we're also doing an initial site assessment. I kind of put this in another color or bold, because going back to that initial site assessment, that should not only be done at that pre-construction meeting, that should be done way back at the beginning when this project is first submitted to the planning board. That's really the most important time to do the initial site assessment, because a lot of things get passed pretty easily. I was this consultant for one municipality, the planning board, for about 20 years. I learned in very short order, any plan I'm gonna review, I need to do a site inspection. Again, whether it's a 2-lot subdivision, 200 lots, commercial site, a site inspection is in order. Not every plan set is gonna show everything that's on site. So I can't emphasize that enough, that initial site assessment. Anyway, getting back to the qualified inspector, he's required to do weekly inspections. If the area of disturbance is equal to or greater than 5 acres, in other words, exposed soils, I'll get into that in a little more detail later, they're required to do bi-weekly inspections. They should be doing inspections after rainfall events. It's no longer required, but the current permit, it was, but with the initial permit that came out in 2003. But they took that out. It is recommended, if you have a significant rainfall event, it is recommended you take a drive out to a site. He's also required to keep a SWIP inspection logbook on site. That's basically a book of all the inspections done by the qualified inspector. And again, amend the SWIP if necessary. Owner inspectors requirements. Inspections, according to the permit, the latest general construction permit, inspections are, what qualified inspector is defined as a professional engineer, a certified professional erosion sediment control, or a CPES, or a registered landscape architect. Also, who's able to do the inspection is an individual under direction of a PE that requires at least 8 hours of erosion and sediment control training. And then you have your contractor training that requires at least 1 employee on site. That should be on site daily, with 4 hours of erosion and sediment control training. And this training must be renewed every 3 years. This contractor training must be endorsed by the DEC. Typically, it's conducted by a soil and water conservation district, or also could be taken online. It's a little less expensive if you take it at a soil and water conservation district. It can be a little pricey if you take it online. But in many cases, it has to be taken online because they need to get it real quick. Because some towns do require this as part of a permit process. Okay, when we get into disturbance of 5 acres or more at any one given time. First of all, it requires authorization. Some people call it a waiver. It's an authorization, same thing, but I call it an authorization. The permit calls it an authorization. From the MS4, it's at the discretion of the MS4, but it's recommended that the authorization be granted by the planning board. I recommend that it's granted by the planning board during the application and review process, and then it's duly noted in an approval resolution, and then it's kept on site. I don't think a consultant such as myself or an engineer should just authorize that on their own. I think they should bring it up to the planning board, discuss with the planning board why they think this authorization should be considered, let the planning board vote on it. If they vote in favor of it, then put it in the resolution. And then also, like I said, have that resolution on site with that documentation. Where it gets a little difficult is technical justification is required by the applicant for consideration of the authorization. I'll get into that in another slide. When that authorization is approved by the town, the MS4, there is different construction permit requires as far as inspections are concerned. The operator is required to do bi-weekly inspections as opposed to weekly inspections. You're required to do soil stabilization when 7 days of inactive areas with exposed soils as opposed to 14 days. DEC doesn't require it, but I recommend seasonal constraints between December 1st and March 1st, just to get down to that 5-acre threshold, so you don't have 10 or 12 acres open with a lot of snow melt and rainfall come March or April. DEC does require the preparation of a phasing plan, cuts and fills. Again, this is reviewed by the MS4. You have to provide a temporary and permanent soil stabilization plan. And there should be more frequent MS4 compliance inspections by the MS4 or the MSO or the consultant when you've got more than 5 acres open. Technical justification for land disturbance of 5 acres more at any one given time. It's kind of a no-brainer if a building footprint is in excess of 5 acres. That's kind of a no-brainer. That's technical justification. Balance, cut, and fill for either a commercial site plan or a subdivision plan, golf courses. If I were to review a site plan now or a subdivision, whatever, I would call DEC first. This is one of their pet peeves, and their definition of technical justification for this 5 acre can fall into a kind of a gray area. So if I was reviewing one now, I would call them to make sure we're on the same page with what I'm reviewing and what I might be recommending to the planning board. During this process, you want to consider what kind of soils you have, what is the topography, what are the potential pollutant sources, do you have wetlands and water bodies on site? Additional MS4, and this is in the permit, requirements and recommendations if you've got more than 5 acres open. If you've got poor soils, which is typical in Dutchess County in most cases, your sediment traps and drainage swales should be double-sized. You should have sediment traps within each construction phase, intermediate grading plan showing all erosion and sediment control measures. Slope stabilization measures should be conducted within 3 days. Then filter bags on downstream end of your outlet pipe of sediment basins. You need to have a dedicated erosion and sediment control crew. I mean, how often does that happen? Pretty much not at all, but this is what you're supposed to be doing. And you should have someone on call during earth-moving activities and after rainfall events. And then you have to have in place procedures for turbid discharges. What are you going to do? This gets back to, a lot of times you have a site that does not require speedies permit coverage. It just comes in for a building permit. It might be 3/4 of an acre. And typically you just submit a grading plan or a plot plan. It's reviewed by someone in the town. It might be reviewed by one of your consultants, the town engineer's office, whatever. It should show erosion sediment control measures on the plan. But you have the problem. Who is doing the site inspections? It's not the operator, he's not required to. And I've seen in many cases over the past 20 years since this permit's been out, more turbid off-site discharges on a single-family residence than on large, very large subdivisions, 200 lot subdivisions or large commercial sites. So a lot of times your single-family resident can be just as difficult as a large site. Penalties for non-compliance, again, as the SMO, you're required for enforcement. You can issue administrative orders, an order to remedy, a stop work order. And while I'm on that, if you're driving around town and you just happen to drive, you can't be everywhere all the time. But if you're just driving by and you just see something that looks like there's 2 or 3 acres of exposed soils open that you know nothing about, that requires an immediate stop work order, period. And then you go back and see what's going on, issue the NOV, order to remedy. But it can also include civil actions, criminal prosecutions. What's most effective in a lot of cases, when sometimes it's difficult to get a contractor to get in line to get his erosion sediment control measures in place, is withhold the footing inspection, withhold an electrical inspection, withhold the CO. A lot of times that'll get that contractor working faster than a stop work order will, or an NOV. I mean, you need to use your own judgment in that case. The DEC has their own penalties for noncompliance, and that's why the SMO enforcement is in the MS4's best interest. The DEC, if the DEC's called for a complaint and they come out on a site in your municipality, more than likely they will provide a written notice of violation. That'll go to the operator. That'll also land on the supervisor's desk. They'll also issue an administrator order on consent. They may issue fines. They always threaten that in their memo that goes out, their violation that goes out, of $37,500 per day per violation. This permit is also subject to third-party lawsuits. If people downstream have standing, they can file a lawsuit. The issue here is there's been cases where the operator has not only gotten the NOV and the administrator order on consent from the DEC, but also the MS4 ended up on the supervisor's desk. So it's, you don't want that to happen. You want to enforce it on your level, and at least have the documentation. There's also cases where DEC's come out and given an NOV to the operator, but they've seen the town has been also doing their due diligence, their inspections, their order to remedies and whatnot, and they haven't issued that violation to the town. But again, like I said, I've seen it issued to the town on 3 occasions. It's just something I threw in there. You have to be on call. I got a call. Obviously, it was the town of Wappinger. Can you meet out here? And you just kind of need to jump when you need to jump. So it falls for the SMO as well as the consultant. What do you do if you feel this happened many years ago, in your MS4, in your municipality, you have erosion control deficiencies, but it's a DOT project, a DPW project, it's utility companies. You can see this goes back quite a ways. This is probably about 2010 or something like that. But this is a DOT project. That's a wetland on your left side, and the silt fence is obviously in disrepair. It's not well stabilized, the slopes. Used as a barrier, which is not its purpose. What we did in that case, not this particular case, but getting back to utilities, we did have a site in one municipality where Central Hudson had left trenches open for about 2 or 3 weeks. We had a significant rainfall event. The operators and everything got washed out. The operators' stormwater management basin just got blown out. Inlet protection measures got blown out. Sediment tracks got blown out. There was sediment all over the road. I mean, it was a mess. So I said to the SMO, why don't you try issuing an order to remedy or a notice of violation to Central Hudson and see what happens. And she did, and within a day or two, we had a half a dozen guys from Central Hudson out there. They jumped right on it. They restored everything. So, it really wasn't the operator's fault that it took so long for the utilities to be installed. So Central Hudson took it upon themselves, based on that NOV issued by the town, to restore everything, and actually, they did a great job. And I've worked with them a lot ever since, and they've really done very well. Okay, basic erosion sediment control plan. You should know the basics. Your basically standards is what's called the Blue Book. It's New York State standards and specifications for erosion sediment control. When you're on site, when you design a plan or you're starting a plan, you want to control erosion first and then sediment. You have temporary and permanent erosion sediment control measures. You want to make sure you control on-site construction and waste materials. You may have phasing and stabilization measures. You certainly should have a construction sequencing schedule, as well as an inspection and maintenance schedule. And then your construction site inspections are required by both your operator and the MS4 or your SMO. I'm basically going to go through quick principles of erosion sediment control. Erosion control is any practice that protects the soil surface and prevents soil particles from being detached by rainfall or wind. Therefore, erosion control is a source control that treats the soil as a resource that has value and should be kept in place. Kind of like a no-brainer. Sediment control is a practice that traps the soil after it's been detached and moved by water or wind. So therefore, it's more of a secondary measure where your erosion control is your primary measure. It's usually a passive system that rely on filtering or settling the particles out of the water or wind. It treats the soil as a waste product. It should be removed from its location. A lot of times you'll see silt fence, it's 75% of it's backed up with sediment that should be removed and taken to an off-site someplace. What are the factors that influence erosion? Different type of soil types cause it. Your cover, do you have vegetative cover or not? It's the erosion. The goals of a new erosion control plan. First of all, control erosion and sediment by minimizing the opportunity to be transported or runoff. Contain and trap sediment close to its place of origin. I like to see sediment traps. That's not usually what happens, but I would like to see them more often. Control, because what typically happens during a site is your operator uses his permanent post-construction stormwater management facilities as as temporary sediment basins during construction. It's kind of one of my pet peeves, but that's typically what goes on. So getting back to this, you want to control erosion at its source rather than to design or just install perimeter controls to trap sediment. Erosion control measures, primary control, again, it's your primary control measure. That should be your first measure you do. It's stabilizing soil. That's the best thing you can do to prevent erosion. You can have diversion swales. Vegetation is by far the best method. There are biotechnical protection measures. There's rolled erosion sediment control blankets. Another one of my pet peeves is winter stabilization measures. Usually in my inspection reports, I start in September, no later than, usually I start in September, informing the operator to consider implementing winter stabilization measures now, before we get into November, which we are now, and they've yet to implement their winter stabilization measures. So sometimes you can just repeat, and it goes on year after year after year. But you really want to start implementing those winter stabilization measures in September, October. Usually mid-October is the end of your germination when you get any kind of seed growth. You have diversion measures, temporary permanent swales or dikes. On your lower left, you have a pipe slope drain, and so you have steep slopes, so it's going to capture that runoff up top and then send it down to a little sediment trap, in this case. Stone check dams, they reduce the erosion in drainage channels. It restricts the velocity of flow in the channel. Hay bales are not acceptable. After all these years, we still see hay bales in drainage channels, but they're not acceptable. Check dams are really the only acceptable practice. There are, I'll take that back, there are some products out there now that are also acceptable. Riprap outlet protection, it reduces the depth, velocity, and energy of the runoff, and it does not erode the receiving downstream reach. Vegetation, again, is really your best measure. The roots hold the soil together. Ground cover slows down the runoff, filters the sediment out of the water. If you're going into winter stabilization, you could use the temporary seeding. If not, just go ahead and permanent seed. Temporary mulches, it protects the soil from erosion until vegetation can be established. Typically, if you're seeding and mulching, the standard is 2 tons of mulch per acre of seeding during winter stabilization. They recommend 4 tons. This is in the New York State Standard and Specifications. 4 tons of hay or straw mulch. And then you have riprap slope protection is another measure you can Erosion control products, there's a lot of products out now. Your biodegradable, which I'm seeing used on a lot of sites, and it's actually necessary now as well. Jute mesh, curled wood fiber, straw blanket, wood fiber, coconut fiber. You have all kind of fibers out there that are rolled erosion control measures products. You have some non-biodegradable plastic netting, plastic mesh. In this case, it's alongside of a stream bank. It's very steep slopes. You really need to hold that soil in. Sediment control measures, again, this is a secondary measure, and proper installation is the key to performance. If it's not installed properly, the sediment's gonna go off-site. I like to see temporary sediment traps in basins. Unfortunately, you don't see them as often as I would like to see them. Temporary barriers, this is what you most often see is silt fence. I'm starting to see straw wattles now. I actually like the straw wattles. I think they're easy to install. I think they hold up better than the silt fence. So I have no problem. I've given some contractors the go-ahead. You know, if you want to use straw wattles in lieu of silt fence, I have no problem with it, even though the plan may call out silt fence. Temporary inlet protection. You need a temporary stabilized construction entrance. That needs to be maintained constantly to avoid tracking out onto the road. And again, as I said, inspection and maintenance is critical. I'm going to go back to that inspection and maintenance because I have a thought that could run through my head. When I went back and talked about the trained contractor that the operator is supposed to have on site, he should be going around daily and checking all, the silt fence, everything, all the erosion sediment control measures, and documenting, what he fixed, what didn't, whatever. I would say all sites require that. Maybe 5 to 10% of those individuals actually do their job. It falls upon you as the SMO. You typically end up doing their job for them. So I just wanted to, not being critical, I'm just saying the DEC came out with this trained contractor certification that the operator is supposed to have on site, but I see very few of them actually doing the job as the permit states. So unfortunately, it falls on you as the MSO to sort of do their job for them. Getting back to sediment control measures, we have sediment traps and basins, which I like to see on sites. Reduce sediment and manages runoff, and it's generally sized for smaller drainage areas, 5 acres or less. Again, getting back to the sediment traps and basins, the storage volumes of 3,600 square feet per acre of the drainage area. It must outlet onto a stabilized ground or into a water course, stabilized channel, or into a stored drain system. Maintenance needs to be performed weekly and after storm events. And once that sediment trap has reached 50% of its capacity, the sediment should be removed. Typical example of silt fence. These are temporary barriers. There's a photo of silt fence here. As I said, straw wattles, stone check dams, dikes. These are examples of straw wattles. Again, I like them a lot. I think they're very effective. I think they're more effective than silt fence, especially since probably 75% of the time silt fence is not installed properly to begin with. These are very difficult not to install properly, so it makes it easy for everybody. So I'm kind of leaning towards these a lot now. I like these. Temporary inlet filters on storm drains. This is what's in the DEC manual. It's not what I really recommend. When the yard drain or catch basin is, in the ground or not in the road, typically you would use silt fence inlet protection. The block and gravel inlet protection, I'm not a fan of at all. It's in the road. It's hard to maintain. It washes out. There's a lot of other temporary inlet protection measures, and there's a lot of manufactured inlet protection measure products out there. Your stabilized construction entrance. You should also, especially for the larger site, with a lot of construction activity, a lot of vehicles going in and out, especially if it's very heavy equipment, You should also have wheel wash facilities on site. The stabilized construction entrances should be really almost maintained weekly. They get so dirty. And also, be careful when you walk on stabilized construction entrances, not to roll your ankle. I've done that a few times. Wood chips are not an acceptable measure. You'll have some guys say, oh, I'm just gonna put wood chips down, it's good. It's not. It's not good for a stabilized construction entrance. Why do they fail? Why do erosion control measures fail? Number one, it's failure to follow and implement the plan. And in most cases also, it really comes down to three things: installation, maintenance, and inspection and maintenance. Have they installed it properly? Are they inspecting it routinely? And are they maintaining it? Now we're going to go back to, this is when the permit first came out in 2003. We had that, as I discussed, that 2003 to 2008 implementation period for the MS4. That's also when the construction permit came out, where if you disturbed an acre or more, you were required to get Speedy's general construction permit coverage. At that time frame, there was no SMO from 2003 to 2008. There was nobody on the town's end as far as inspecting these sites, so to speak, other than maybe your code enforcement officer. So what was happening was, it was kind of like the Wild West. You had this permit out there. They wanted you to review it at the planning board level in accordance with their permit, but DEC was the one that actually allegedly reviewed the plan, the permit, and they approved it. So the approval would come from DEC. It didn't come from the town. But you were required to, again, review it at the planning board level in accordance with their permit. It was kind of a weird situation. It was kind of convoluted. And then, again, there's no ordinances in place yet. It's not until 2008 when you're required to adopt those ordinances and have a stormwater management officer or someone to enforce these ordinances. So a lot of these slides here range from that 2000 to 2008 period. And like I said, it was like the Wild West. You just can't make this stuff up. You don't even know what are they thinking. There's very little training. Some pretty bad stuff. It's like I said, you can't make it up. Not that this still doesn't happen today, but at least you have someone to enforce this. Using silt fence as a contain boulders. So they lost some silt fence area, just threw some hay bales in. Never use silt fence at a 90-degree angle. That's a recipe for failure. This was a really difficult site. This was a really difficult site. And this site was, I worked for an engineering firm at the time. We were the operator's qualified inspector. Again, you didn't have an MSO. You just had, in this case, you had a code enforcement officer on the MS4 end, and the engineering firm I worked with, we were the quote-unquote qualified inspector. It was a nightmare trying to get this site. And you can't even make this up. I still to this day cannot figure out what they were trying to accomplish here. I mean, you could stare at this. Again, this was the site. It was not pretty. It was not pretty. It was a large contracting firm. I won't name names, but they just really didn't care. I mean, they didn't care. No matter what we would write up. See at this time, during this time frame also, we were writing up all this stuff, all these deficiencies, but there was no incentive for the operator to do anything because there was no ordinances, unless you called DEC on them. That was the only other avenue to go. This was their. I think this was one of what they said, a stone check dam. I said, no, you need to reduce the size of the stone. So then they came back with this pea gravel. I said, no, you need to increase the size of the stone. So this, and you just out there during a rainfall event, you can just see the sediment running down the road into a MS4 road again. Rough site, very rough site. I don't know what they were doing here, but I will give them credit. They did have their little stake in the ground with the little marker at the 50%. This happened to be, I got a call one day. The site totally blew out, went downhill, made a right turn, then made another right turn into a cemetery, and a number of gravestones were just sediment laden. I mean, it was just covered in sediment. I had a planning board meeting that night. It was probably about 95 degrees out. The humidity was 95 degrees. I was not happy. This is just one area where the site blew out with an open trench, is again one of my pet peeves. But this probably goes back to about 2005. It was during that time frame where, you know, nobody was enforcing this. I'm just trying to not get my shoes muddy because I got a planning board meeting in this evening. Another one of my pet peeves are open trenches. They should be, there's no reason they shouldn't be backfilled within 24 hours, 48 hours at the latest. And this is what happens, and it's just ridiculous. Inlet protection, here you have no inlet protection at all. Oh, now I'm at 2000, past 2008. Now we have stormwater management officers. We have our ordinances in place. This is a site, again, it gets back to one of my pet peeves where the permanent stormwater management facilities are being utilized as the temporary sediment basin during construction. It's getting all the runoff, so to speak. This is a shot in the winter, and you can see now what's happened here. It's taken a lot of damage. You also see you got a porta potty about 3 or 4 feet from a catch basin, which is not really a good idea. There's no inlet protection. Interesting, again, a porta potty, a different site, porta potty next to a catch basin with no inlet protection, but the same contractor. So I thought that was interesting. They did the same thing on 2 different sites in 2 different municipalities. And this is what it looks like when you start getting the sediment runoff into your conveyance system, your catch basins. This is a product that's frequently used, and this is frequently what you see when you drive through a site that's using them. They don't replace them, they don't set them properly, they just let them rot on site. This is a large subdivision. And take a look at the road, you can just see it's kind of lined with a nice layer of soil and sediment. Large subdivision, I know there's time constraints, time is money. What all too often happens is these operators, if you have a 2-inch rainfall event, the next day, they don't care. They're working, they're driving the trucks all over the road, they're driving all the machinery all over the road, and now all your roads look like this. And now it's going into your conveyance system and back into your permanent post-construction stormwater management facility that's being used as a temporary sediment basin. So another one of my pet peeves is when the soil is really wet, you know, confine your activities, at least try not to be tracking it out into the road. I'm out here with the operators, inspectors, we're just going through and coordinating all of our comments and directives for the operator. This was a site that was brought to my attention. I went out here, saw all this turbid runoff. This is where it was going. This is what it looked like, pretty bad, pretty nasty. It took us a while, we figured it out. This actually does go back to that 2003 to 2008 timeframe. There was a construction site about a mile or so away that just totally blew out after a major rainfall event. And that was the result. This was a site, large subdivision. They probably have 10 or 12 large stormwater management basins or facilities. I had gotten a call from the supervisor. This was 2 days after a significant rainfall event. There's a development, a lakeside development, an older development, about a half a mile to a mile downslope of this subdivision that complained of turbid runoff into their lake. So I was asked by the supervisor to go out and take a look. And coming down some very steep slopes, basically, it did blow out. You can even see some gully erosion. Their outlet structures failed. Everything blew out. So my next job was to walk, however far, what, half mile, I don't know how long it was, through all this wooded area, trying to track if in fact this was the source of this turbidity in this lake. And you can see the silt fence, they had some silt fence up, that got blown out. And this is what I found. This is 2 days later, and you could still see the turbidity going into the lake. I just took this photo. This was on my way out of that site. I was totally exhausted. I think I walked a couple miles. I probably pulled a few dozen ticks off of me after I got out of there. I pulled ticks off of her. And that's another thing out there. Just be, when you're out there and you're in the wooded area, be careful of ticks. Either put some spray on or check yourself as you get out. Make sure you have your cell phone on with you. These are very steep slopes. I mean, I actually wanted to walk along the toe of the slope, but she wanted to go straight up, so that's the way we went. This is a site that is using some rolled erosion control products. They're very effective when utilized properly. They're just meandering along. Where they really needed to do it, though, is around this, to get some inlet protection, get this area protected. I was assuming they were going to, I think they should have started there and worked their way around the other way, but they eventually got there. This was an interesting, sometimes it's one of those things you can't make this up. The site in the background was a site that I was inspecting. It was a commercial site going in. There was a, during the planning board process, there was a decision made to have a connection between this new development, this new commercial site, and an existing auto dealership. And I was actually inspecting this site once a week. As I was coming out of getting my car serviced, I saw they were just dumping the concrete right out in this pathway between the two sites. So I just stopped, took a photo, contacted the SMO, and within the next day they had a concrete washout in accordance with the standards in place. But it was just, if I wasn't driving out at that minute, I mean, I obviously would have seen the evidence of it a few days later, but it was just that minute I'm driving out, I caught him doing it, so busted. This was a site, another large subdivision. The operators, this is where you get into the train contractor not doing his job. In this case was also, in my opinion, the operator's inspector, qualified inspector, professional, was not doing their job. Because part of their job of the operator's qualified inspector is to also inspect the perimeter of the site. Any points of potential discharge around the entire perimeter of the site. This is a very, very large subdivision. When I'm doing just a compliance inspection, I'm not walking around the entire perimeter of the site typically. I'm just, checking on, making sure the documentation is on site, making sure, your basic erosion control measures are in place, stuff like that. What we had going on here was, in the background is the rail trail. You can kind of see it back there. And what happened, this site blew out. You can't quite see it, the rail trail is back here. But I would say about at least 200 feet of rail trail. They have a little swale along, here's the rail trail back there. They have a little swale along the side of the rail trail. That was totally covered in sediment and soil from this site. So what was required, again, the county contacted the town. The county was all upset. The rail trail was laden with sediment. And actually, some of it actually went onto the rail trail, besides that little drainage swale along the trail. What happened here is the contractor not only had to get his act together and stabilize, all its exposed soils, he had to go back, clean out all the sediment from the rail trail and restore their swales on the rail trail. And again, that's the same site, the same day. This is another site in another town. It's again, we're getting down, 20 years ago, they used to say, there's not any good land left, you got all tough sites. Well, 20 years later, it's even more like that. There's not many good sites left. It's either steep slopes or wetlands. This is a site, a lot of steep slopes, a lot of no wetlands on this site, but it's just another one of those tough sites, going in, no matter how good the operator is, there's gonna be problems. So I've just got various slides, different days going out there. Again, those open trenches I don't like, but, so far, not too bad. Hey, it's looking pretty good. He's getting his erosion control, and we're getting his erosion measures in. He's got some rolled erosion control product going down. He's getting germination, seeds coming up, looking pretty good, other than, the areas up here that are still exposed. Not very good job of a stabilized construction entrance to one of the lots. Again, you got the exposed soils up here alongside the bank of the driveway, going up to one of the houses up here. And he's got some orange construction fence that's really doing nothing but falling down. And as you can see, typically we work in the rain, we track soil, out into the road. This inlet protection needs to be inspected weekly. Marina has a thing for, she checks out every catch basin. Now, on another day, I just doing a drive-in, I started to drive in and I only pulled up so far because I decided I don't think I'm gonna want to go to the car wash and wash out my wheel wells after this inspection. So I pulled back out and parked, and this is all sediment. Almost the entire, it's not ice, it's sediment. Someone did think it was smart enough to take a walk through it, but I wasn't going to. And you can see where a large portion was coming off this lot here. And there's their base permanent post-construction stormwater management basin, utilized as usual as a temporary sediment basin during construction. That was totally going back to that site. I obviously called up a stop work order was obviously issued, NOV was issued, order to remedy was issued. This was another day driving in. You can see on the left, I'm driving into the site. On the right, I'm driving out of the site. It does finally have silt fence up over here, but it's just totally failed. It's not installed properly. Again, I called the SMO. Notice of violation, order to remedy was filed. And this is another type of scenario you can run into. You have a subdivision, it's a tough site, you have steep slopes, you have underground springs, you have poor soils. This site is fully developed. People have been living in high-end houses for 4 or 5 years, and this is what's still going on. What happens is, and what's not taken into account, and it's kind of hard to take it into account, but when you have these really tight subdivisions on difficult sites, after people build these high-end homes, they also want to build, big garages, pole barns, sheds, pools, pool decks, a lot of additional impervious area. So you can probably throw another 10 or 15% impervious area onto a tight site, and this is what you end up with. Now, everything, these people, again, 4 or 5 years or so, people are living in these homes. And now we're still back at the drawing board trying to figure out how to resolve these issues. Now, a lot of times you'll run into, most towns have some sort of ordinance regarding getting a grading permit. It may not require speedies permit coverage, it may not be over an acre. Typically, what might trigger it in your ordinance is a change in grade of 2 feet or more, or importation of 200 or 300 yards of cubic yards of material. That might trigger that grading permit, or whatever it might be called. 90% of the time, it's done illegally. It's not someone coming in and going, hi, I want to expand my backyard, here's the grading plan, I want to do things the right way. Most of the time, it's done illegally. I can't tell you some of the nasty soils I've run into when I've asked to go out on a site inspection. A lot of times the soil's coming up in the city, and it's like 8 different colors, and you've got so much different types of material in there, it's just nuts. In this particular case, I got a call to go look at this. Now, what also happens if you've got imported fill and you're in excess of an acre, now that also kicks in the speedies permit coverage. So now you got 2 things going on. They didn't apply for their grading permit or whatever would fall in your town ordinance, but now they also got a speedies permit coverage. So now that's also your problem, is the SMO. So I'm driving into this site. This is like an extreme one. And I actually wondered, this was probably a subdivision, I don't know, done 60s, 70s, something like that. But it's a fairly long cul-de-sac. And I was like, how did it take these people so long to file a complaint with the town? I mean, this is just an enormous amount of material that was brought in, not the best material in the world. I know the source, I won't release the source. It's pretty scary out here. You can see some of these photos. All this material was brought in before, it took a while for people to complain. And in this case, it's very dangerous. This is also brings on another issue. You have a health and safety issue. Now this is almost a town level, town board issue. What do we do here? We've got a severe health and safety issue. What if some kids go down here? I was very careful where I was stepping. And it's well over an acre. This was someone with younger legs than me, went down further, and you could just see by the scale, these vehicles in the background, how steep this was and how much material was brought in here and how dangerous this site really is. And there's another view of this site too. But you will encounter this type of issue. It might fall under your grading permit, but now it falls under your speedies permit as well because you're over an acre. But now you also have garbage fill you have to contend with, and what do you do with that? This is a site, again, it didn't require, you might run into this as well. It did not require a speedies permit coverage, but it was a sensitive site because it was a wireless site, so everybody during the planning board review process, the neighbors never want a wireless facility in their neighborhood, so there was a lot of complaints. So my basic job it wasn't really a speedies permit job, it wasn't a lot of area of disturbance, was to make sure there's no complaints on site during construction. But also there were a lot of sensitive wetlands on site, so there was a lot of meandering around wetlands to get the access in to get it to the monopole, the lease within that lease area. So we're out here first checking. At first they were required to install. We had a pre-construction meeting, met with the contractor. The contractor was excellent. Most of my communication with him was on the phone because he would be in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, wherever. But we kept in constant communication. He was excellent. He was excellent to deal with. But the first step was to install a construction fence to delineate the area of disturbance. So we're walking around, checking all the construction fence. Everything looked good. According to the plans, we did have a lot of sensitive wetlands on site, so we wanted to protect those. We also did not want any complaint from residents going into the town. So then I came out, I said, okay, your delineated area with the construction fence looks good. Go ahead and install your silt fence. So now we're installing a silt fence. Looks good. Everything looks good on the left side. I'm seeing on the right side, rain is alerting me to some crappy sill fence installation, so we got that fixed. But at the end of the day, coming out of this site, at the end, they finished up, they did a great job. And here I was dealing with somebody just on the phone, typically in another state. I would go down there, I'd talk with 3 or 4 or 5 contractors that were, laborers basically that were working outside. I would talk to them, but they were doing a great job. And as they trenched, this was probably a good half a mile or so in from the road. There was a lot of trenching of that conduit to get to the cell tower. They backfilled every day. Whatever they opened, they backfilled that same day. It was an excellent job, especially even they were coming from different states to come down here. So I have more trouble with local contractors than I do with somebody out of state. So they did a great job at the end of the day. There's another, I try to show some good photos when I can. This was a town project. It was utilized for one purpose and just was being restored back to its natural purpose, so to speak. But that is the DEC wetland on the left. A good job was done. It was stabilized well. Silt fence was installed good. There's another project done well. I was inspecting the basin. It's their emergency outflow here. Stone was good and clean. All right, now you have your second ordinance, your illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance. That's your guideline and responsibilities for enforcement of your IDDE ordinance. That's again party MS4 permit. It was a requirement to be also issued in 2003, or 2008, excuse me. Example of illicit discharges are broken lines from sanitary sewers, cross connections, failing septic systems, floor drains connected to storm sewers, illegal dumping, sanitary sewer overflows, straight pipe sewer discharges, or pet waste in the MS4 system. And I've basically seen pretty much all of these during the past 15 years or so. What are your duties? What are the SMO duties under this ordinance? Again, it's inspections, tracking, documentation, and enforcement. Basically, the idea is if you detect an illicit discharge, you need to try to find its source. It's not always easy. It's usually pretty difficult. But if you do identify the source, then it's to eliminate the illicit discharge. That's basically the routine. But it involves inspections, tracking, documentation, and enforcement. With regard to your illicit discharges, it can come in, many times it might come in as a complaint from a resident. It might be just during a routine inspection. More often than not too, it can be your highway department doing their inspections and cleaning your catch basins. They'll see something that shouldn't be there. They'll smell something that doesn't smell right. They should let, you should be in actually contact with your highway superintendent as an SMO. If he encounters something like that, he needs to bring that back to you because now it's your job to deal with that. During dry weather outfall inspections, that's another time where the highway department or whoever is doing those inspections might encounter an illicit discharge. You need to establish a stormwater hotline. That is a DEC requirement. That should be on your town website. And as the SMO, that should be your direct phone to you. So again, when we get to illicit discharges, first of all, you want to identify the likely discharge, try to trace the source of it, and now you need to get into all the documentation as well. You need to document the determination of the source of the discharge. You need to notify the property owner or the appropriate regulatory authority. It might be the health department. If you have a failing septic, you need to notify the health department. And at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to eliminate the illicit discharge. This is an example of a form, actually the MS4, Dutchess County MS4 committee worked on this. So we would have this available in 2008 for dry weather, outfall dry weather inspection forms. That's typically done by the highway department. In some cases, And one municipality, I did have the SMO that was doing them in his spare time, which was great, because they were actually getting done. Highway department, you know, they have a lot on their plate, but, you know, really, the highway department should be doing these. You kinda gotta stay on their case to make sure they get done, because you're required to do 20% of your outfall inspections per year. So if you have 100 outfalls in your municipality, you're required to do at least 20 inspections per year. End of that 5-year period, 100% of your outfalls should be inspected. If you get audited, that's one of the things that they're gonna be looking for. So, also, you should have on your town website an illicit discharge report form. This is where any resident can just fill out that form. It goes right to the town. Also has written down there that, you know, your identity, your identity will be kept confidential, you know, so we're not gonna be telling anybody who filed a complaint. But this needs to be, again, if you're audited, they're gonna wanna see that you have this on your website. So if you don't, get something up. This is a form I just found somewheres, and I gave it to the MS4s that I worked with. It's just an IDD hotline incident tracking sheet. So when illicit discharge does occur, we can identify it, start to track it, document it. Just so, again, in case you're audited, you need to have this documentation. You're also required under the permit to have program procedures in case of an illicit discharge detection. These are some I just wrote up for one of my MS4s at the time, and I just carry the same program procedures over to every other MS4 as well. Okay, documentation. Once you detect an illicit discharge, utilize your program, look at your program procedures, utilize your outfall inspection, which I spoke about for documentation, typically done by the highway department. If you have time as an SMO, if you have nothing else to do, it'd be great if you went out and did them. Utilize that MS4 illicit discharge report form available on the town website. Utilize that IDDE hotline incident tracking sheet for documentation. The more documentation you have, the better. It's required as per the permit. Even in the annual report, they will ask you, how many illicit discharges were detected this reporting period, or identified, how many were resolved, how many were eliminated. Well, again, as I said, at an audit, you're going to have to provide all that paperwork. Again, as the SMO, you're the enforcement authority for this illicit discharge detection ordinance. You may issue administrative orders, order to remedy, notice of violation, civil action, criminal prosecution, and again, this permit allows for third-party lawsuits if somebody has standings. Now, and what I've said previously is, typically your illicit discharges are difficult to trace. Well, in this particular case, it was pretty simple. This, not far from my home, really. I drive by here every day. I just drove by one day and I go, what's going on here? This catch basin actually discharges to another catch basin across the street, which discharges to an outfall into Wappinger Creek. So, well, guess what? The firehouse painted their doors, but I don't know if they used the water-based paint, oil-based paint. So it was pretty evident in this case where the illicit discharge came from. It doesn't get any easier than this. So I called the town, and this is a county road. I called the town to let them know, you might want to take a look at this. I also called the county and just kind of let them know, I don't know what you want to do, because, it's going into your system. And actually the Dutchess County is what's called a non-traditional, non-land use MS4. So they're also responsible for cleaning their catch basins, and just as the MS4 is. So what happened, actually the very next morning, I was kind of shocked. The county actually took it upon themselves. They came down there and with a big vac truck, and they cleaned out 4 or 5 of the catch basins. on their own. Maybe the town should have been doing that, but the county just came right down and did it. And then the county called me up and said, what did I want to do about it? And I go, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? So I decided, well, again, not knowing whether it's an oil-based or water-based paint, I said, you know what? Their parking lot could use to be, not looking too good. They could, basically seal it. That would look pretty good, and I think it would solve any issues with the paint. So the county told them to basically seal their entire parking lot, so it looks nice now. So, with that being said, in conclusions, you SMOs, you do have a difficult job. Maybe your town, other staff members, maybe your town board members, the supervisors don't realize that, but you do have a difficult job. You likely also wear many hats. You're also many of you are the code enforcement officer. You might be the building inspector. You might also be the floodplain administrator. You might be something else as well. You can never catch up. I mean, even if you're just working on this, typically, 6, 8, 10 projects going on at any given time. Plus you've got all your other duties, but you have to know, it's difficult to catch up. I know I've been out with SMOs and they're showing me what everything else they got to do today. They're never going to get to it, but they don't need to be out here because of this problem, but they are because that's their job. But that's why I say you have a difficult job. But again, you have to know your ordinances. You have to know when to take enforcement, what the procedures are. You need to know your permit requirements. You should know your basic erosion and sediment control measures. And one of the issues is, and I encounter this as well when I'm conducting inspections, in most towns, I'm not giving the first time I'm seeing a site plan of the subdivision or is at the pre-construction meeting. So it's the first time I'm opening up a set of plans. And many times I take a 5 or 10 minute look at it and I go, this isn't gonna work, And again, not pointing a finger at anybody, things get passed by, people make mistakes, but things just jump out at you sometimes where this is a tough site, this is not gonna work. So the point I'm making here is you have little to no input during the planning board review process. I mean, you're out there in the trenches, they're looking at a piece of paper, and you can make a lot of stuff work on a piece of paper, but you're the guy or girl or woman that's out there, doing these inspections. Like I said, you're in the trenches, but they're not likely involving you in the review process. So you probably see the set of plans, like the first time you're seeing them is at the pre-construction meeting or the first time they're handed to you. Okay, this site is now approved by the planning board. It's in your hands now. Regardless, you're going to have to make difficult decisions on occasion. You're definitely going to deal with unreasonable people on occasion. You will definitely say to yourself, you can't make this up once a week, and I still do. I mean, I just did last week. But like I say, at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, be respectful, be tough, firm and direct, because your enforcement is in the best interest of the MS4. The town needs to know that. They really do. So just in closing, just acknowledging my companion on my sites. I don't know how I do it without her. Believe me, I've tripped a few times and she was right there to catch me. So that's the end of the presentation. So, anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, or try to.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Walter.
Questions?
No questions?
You retiring now, Walter?
I've been going semi the past few years. Still not fully. Still out there.
Okay.
So if there's no questions, I guess.
I'm gonna turn off the live stream then.
Sounds good.
We can get a copy of that, Walter?